let's jump over to the next person. I think, Danny, you were next. So I'm bringing you back here. Hope you're ready. And we'll give this about, I don't know what your questions are yet. We'll hear them. Whether it takes 10, 20 minutes, I'm not sure yet. But I'd like just for, especially we got so many people in a row, let's at least, yeah, let's give you a good time, but I don't, probably shouldn't stretch it out past 20 minutes. So
Yeah,
if we go
yeah.
beyond, that's fine.
Can you hear me? Is my microphone okay?
I can. Yeah. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Good to meet you.
I wanted to. Oh, good. Nice to meet you too. I wanted to clarify your hot take. And I am not remembering correctly. I just remember your conclusion that it was something. Therefore, it's difficult to say that incest is morally wrong. What was that statement again? Because I took issue with it.
Yeah. First of all, are you one of my commenters? Have I seen you before under a different screen name?
Yeah. Well, it should be the same icon, the little cartoon
Oh, okay.
thing. Yeah.
Okay. Got you. Oh, got you. Okay. Yeah. I think it is familiar. That's why. Um, the, the claim I was making is that if you don't, it's just a moral subjectivity claim. Like if it's just my opinion, uh, that, that incest is wrong, then I could have different opinions. So it was with respect to that. And also, if you remove the idea that it hurts other people, all you gotta do is just modify incest such that it doesn't hurt anybody. And the biggest thing that people have a problem with incest, the biggest number one reason they'll say it's morally wrong is because of the offspring, right? It's a harm towards the offspring, which is, it's very highly probable, and if done with full knowledge that you're going to likely have offspring like that, then you're morally culpable for it. So, but if you remove that constraint, then it's really hard to say why it is morally bad. So that was the gist of it.
Mm-hmm. So on one hand, you're saying that it's difficult for people that are subjectivists to say that it's morally wrong, and you're saying there's some feature of the meta-ethical view of
Mhm.
moral subjectivism, and then your elaboration seemed to be about more about normative ethics, right?
That's right.
Um, that if the secret ingredient to what makes something good or bad, right and wrong, is suffering or harm, then it'd be
Mhm.
difficult to say that
Yep,
it's morally wrong. But I feel like these are two different issues.
for sure. They are.
Okay, all right, just making sure. And could you help me clarify? So if we're bracketing the kind of the normative, because I somewhat agree. I think that there are incestuous relationships that I agree with your latter point that if
Mm.
someone is all about harm then they're going to be incestuous relationships that are not
Can,
harmful.
can I interject here? Because since you're going to leave the normative, it's worth just noting other possibilities, not just harming others. There's three possibilities, at least that Aquinas gives and that C.S. Lewis, for example, gives. They say that you could harm others. That's one way that things could go wrong. You could harm yourself. And this is like a virtue ethics point of view. Like you're becoming the kind of person that sleeps with his sister. That's not good. And then you're also harming God in the sense of like undignifying yourself so that you're undignifying his creature and you're maybe violating some commands and so on. So if you have a normative ethical theory that doesn't have access to those explanations, like virtue ethics has access to, the second one, but if you don't have access to those number two and three, then it's really hard to say why. Once you fix number one, is like it's solved. You're not hurting anybody.
Okay, so you say okay, but it still seemed okay. So there's like some common denominator of issue here. You're saying that on moral subjectivism, right? That's presumably, on your view, not a theistic. Um, uh, it's not that's not a meta ethical theory that involves God. And then if you take a normative theory that doesn't involve God, if you take God out of the picture, either way, there's going to be problems. Is what you were
Yeah,
saying?
I think so. Yeah, with respect
Okay,
to meta ethics. Yeah.
but so let's take just the meta ethical thing then. If we have time for the
Okay.
other one, we'll do the other one.
Yeah.
Um, I'm somewhat a subjectivist. Often when I make claims, I'm relativizing it to my attitudes or another person's attitudes or groups of attitudes that I may or may not be included. Um, I feel like if I became a Christian, my view wouldn't change. So suppose I was interested in signing up for Catholicism. I'm assuming you're a
Mhm.
Catholic, right?
I know. Yeah.
Um, I don't. I would still be some kind of subjectivist. I would just think that God would have attitudes about what I'm up to do, and then I would have an attitude about his attitude such that I'd be motivated, given my commitments to Catholicism, to do what he commands me to do or what he wants me to do. Uh,
Gotcha.
so would that seems to be a subjectivist view, and I don't see um, subjectivism as a barrier to being able to say, um, that incest is wrong.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I thought you were going to go a different way with that, like that my claim that incest is wrong wouldn't change. And that could potentially provide a problem for, you know, but because I would just have the same moral claim. I don't think that just to get into what you were saying first to deal with that. I don't think that would be a problem at all because if you held the same moral view, that's fine. It's just you're changing your meta ethics. I
My
think
meta
I
ethics would
think
be the same, or did I misunderstand you? I would, if I became
yeah,
a
yeah.
Catholic,
So this is yeah, so this is just to like look at the logical space here and just say, okay, at first I thought you were saying that my normative claim would remain the same. I still think excess is wrong, but I've just changed my meta ethical claim. And I'd be like, okay, but that's not what you were saying. You're correct. I'm just trying to get at it.
Oh,
Now
okay.
I'm getting at it. You're saying that I could still be a subjectivist, like I wouldn't change my meta ethical view. Um, I the idea here is, and I hear this pretty frequently nowadays, that i- if you believe in objective morality and that God grounds that objective morality, that is essentially subjectivism. Just it's mind, it's not, in other words, it's not mind independent. It's still mind dependent and it's going to be dependent on God's mind. Is that the idea you were going for?
Well, I'm fine to say that there are, let's just, um, meta-ethical theories that include God that are realist or non-subjectivist. I'm fine to say that. But what I gave a model of a flavor of theistic moral subjectivism, that I would probably hold if I became a Catholic. Um, and I would see not, I just don't see how that, if anything, it's more of the normative stuff that you were saying earlier on, the normative claims about, well, look, if suffering is a secret ingredient, you're gonna have issues here. I think that stuff is a little bit more interesting than the meta
Yeah.
ethical stuff because I can include God in my meta ethical theory, and it wouldn't make a difference, right? In terms of me being able to say, it's morally wrong to uh, screw your family members.
So is it the idea here that were you to become a Catholic, which, God willing, you will be, that you would still be a subjectivist, like you wouldn't
Yeah.
be unconvinced of that.
Yeah.
Um, so a couple comments on that. So one, you can always change your view. And I'm not saying that I think it's the correct view. I'm not to put you down or anything like that in a patronizing way, but supposing that subjectivism were the correct view, then yeah, that's fine. You don't have to believe
But I
everything
don't think
before you
I'm
can get
okay.
into that.
So, but what I'm trying to say is that if I
Go
became
ahead.
a Catholic, right? What if I became a Catholic tomorrow? You'd be
Mhm.
Catholic. You would have a different metaphysical theory than me. But seems like
That's fine.
okay. But what about my metaethical theory? Some kind of subjectivism. Um,
Yeah.
i- what am I losing out on by holding to that view rather than your view?
But in my view, I think that your view would be you could hold to it, but your view would be false.
Why would it be false?
Because I think so it depends on what subjectivism is. So I've talked with Lance Independent about this, right? And so the idea of subjectivism, if you throw in a God there, and I've said this to him, and he's like, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if you know Lance Bush.
Yeah, I
He
do.
knows, like, he specializes in this area. He's a lot smarter than I am on it. He's going to say that, well, this is what I said to him, and he was in agreement, is that if you add uh, a deity in there, it has the forcefulness that other views of subjectivism don't have. The idea that, like, if I just hold an opinion, like it's just my opinion, it's just my subjective opinion. I can't force that upon anybody. It's not enforceable. Um, I can hope that people want it. I can try to reason you into it. I don't know why though. It's just like preference though, and so on and so on. And I can maybe compromise and
Well, actually, no Lance's
but
view on this, because I've
yeah,
talked to him about it.
yeah. No, he's a subjectivist in some sense, but he's also a
Well,
quietist. But yeah,
yeah, he wouldn't say
he's
he's a
listed.
subjectivist. He just doesn't think that the criticisms of subjectivism are very good.
Yeah.
But he would say that A subjectivist view that includes God, in your words, would be more forceful insofar as that God can enforce, the moral facts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh,
If
that's
there's
a
no
detail, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but that's not taking away or adding to, the kind of the most general sense of moral subjectivism, right? And it seems like you're just gonna have okay, but I wanna rewind. So what I'm trying to say is that if I became a Catholic, I presume God has attitudes for my life and the way I should live.
Yeah.
Okay. In becoming a Catholic, I'm a committed person to the teachings of Christ,
Yeah.
to the will of God. And so given those commitments, then I and given God's attitudes about what I ought to do, then I can form moral facts about um, you know, giving to charity, taking the
Yeah.
sacrament, not uh, being disapproving of incest, right? Stuff like that. So I don't see anything wrong with that view. I don't see how it's incompatible with Christianity.
Is the idea that you could still be a subjectivist and hold to your subjective morality? Or is it
Yeah.
the idea that subjectivism from God's perspective, which is what, people like, I think many atheists who are in these conversations, they'll say, well, objectivism is just subjectivism from God's point of view. Is that not what you're supposing? Are you really
No,
proposing the more common form of subjectivism where
well,
everybody's
like I said
joining you?
earlier, there are versions of divine command theory, I suppose, that are realist, right? But everything that I said there is compatible with anti-realism.
Yeah.
So because we're all what sort of matters here are my attitude, God's attitudes, right? That's what's
Yeah.
doing all the work in terms of making the moral facts true.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I agree with divine command theories that just are non-realist. Yeah. Cause my question is like, why, what, I mean, I suppose it's logically possible. Perhaps, I don't know. I haven't got really into the ontology of God on this, but for you to have God exist, yet not, yet have moral anti-realism also be true. But I'm wondering why. Like, why think that?
Well, I
Why think
think
that it
well,
would?
just all the
Why
way
think
I'm
that morality is not real if God exists? Why think that morality is
well, by not real,
not?
meaning why should I think that? Look, I mean, because to me, what matters is what God wants for me to do, right? What God's
Yeah.
attitudes. Okay, so it's not that much different than if I'm in a
Oh,
committed
I see.
relationship. Yeah, it's not that much different than being in a committed relationship, like in a marriage. Like what matters is my wife's attitudes and her expectations of me, and so that is, I care about that, and so I'm going to do what she says.
Yeah.
Except God is just that times infinity, I suppose.
And I think that's the relevant difference is you have not just another person, another peer who says, this is my subjective opinion and I can enforce it upon you. You have here the ground of all reality. You have absolute being. You have goodness as God's nature, as his character. And then when it's his subjective opinion, as people like to say, I mean, I think it's kind of improper, inaccurate to just say it's at that
Well,
point.
I've been using the word
Opinion.
attitude.
See?
I think
Or attitude. Yeah.
I mean, is
I think it,
attitude.
not only carries more forcefulness because he can enforce it, but it carries more ontological weight because it's I invented you, I invented morality,
Or why would that?
or
Why would that be the relevant feature? Like, it seems like if Christianity were true, what would matter is well, the reason why God's attitudes would matter to me because I care about
Mm,
maybe the afterlife or I care about
yeah, yeah,
my creator, right? But the him being creator, him being the grounding, him providing afterlife, those are, I think you had a discussion earlier, descriptive, non-normative facts about God. The point is that they only matter insofar as that I have attitudes about them.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
At
I
least the way
suppose.
I.
I mean,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
at the end of the day, just like Lance says, I don't care which view is correct. It doesn't matter to me. This you could say this with respect. I mean, I could say this with respect to this idea. Like, if you're Catholic, what matters is what God wants you to do. It doesn't matter. Like, I mean, yes, we can speculate and theorize upon it, and many of the scholastics did, and many modern people and contemporary people did. Um, but like, you could be a really good Catholic, still get into heaven, be a good Christian, still get into heaven, and not have ever thought about this issue at all, because it's not really bearing upon, you as your, stance as a Christian, if that makes sense. So at the end of the day, I don't know if it matters all that much. And
Well, you're saying it's false. So, or you're saying I'm
yeah,
missing, right? I don't know what I'm missing.
no, this would be a conversation that would just be um, separate from whatever. I mean, it would be something to iron out in the area of philosophy, of course, which is what we're doing. But that's all I'm saying.
Okay, because earlier, this thought experiment with me becoming a Catholic was an
Yeah.
attempt to show that moral subjectivism doesn't have this unique problem, right? The unique problem of not being able to
Yeah.
say XYZ is morally wrong. Seems like there's something else going on that you're having an issue with.
That's the thing. I think the problem with subjectivism is, what if I'm wrong about my own attitudes or my own opinions or my own preferences?
Yeah, there's no problem. Subjectivists can analyze that just fine.
Why? How's that? So, like,
Well,
what if I'm the kind
we
of
have
person who,
conflicting wills, right? Go ahead. Sorry, I
yeah,
interrupted you.
sorry, yeah. So just to have a concrete example. What if I am the kind of person who just enjoys incest? Like, that's just my attitudes, my own preferences and opinions, and my subjective attitude.
How's that a problem for
I
subjective?
enjoy that. Yeah.
How's that a problem for a appraiser relativist? So I don't know if you're familiar with the distinction between agent versus appraiser relativist.
I am. I only recently learned about it, so I'm still foggy on it. And I also have a criticism about it. Like, I think they might collapse into one another, but I must admit and confess I have not thought about this much at all.
Okay. Well, I think you and I
Still-
are appraiser relativists. Go ahead. Did you want to say?
Sorry, go ahead. It would help, especially with people who are listening, just to give a quick rundown of what.
Yeah.
Well,
I think rather than defining it, I'm just going to use it in a case
Okay,
where
great.
we're all appraiser relativists.
Okay.
So I go to a restaurant and I look at the menu and I make a judgment that I'm going to have pizza. I think eating pizza is good. Eating pizza is tasty. And an appraiser relativist can say that while ignoring that other agents would actually utter quite the opposite sort of evaluations, right? So if my wife says pizza's nasty, I'm like, okay, pizza's nasty, but that doesn't mean that therefore I have to think that pizza's nasty,
of
right?
course.
I could accept that pizza's nasty to her, but I still will say and think that pizza is tasty because that's indexed to me. Now on agent relativism, right, you kind of lose out on a little bit of that. So a lot of people attack subjectivism by attacking agent relativism. That where if let's say Attila the Hun wants to do all the evil stuff that you suggested, on an agent relativism, we still have to we the statement butchering people into little pieces, right, is good, and we're just committed to that because it's Attila the Hun's attitudes that sort of the main index, I suppose, for lack of a better
Yeah.
phrase. But on appraiser relativism, right, I could still say that butchering people into little bits and pieces like Attila Hun did is bad, and it doesn't matter what Attila the Hun. To me, it doesn't matter what Attila the Hun wanted, what his attitudes or
that's right,
values
yeah.
are.
Yeah. So let me just interject here. So I wasn't saying what if Attila Han, enjoys incest. I was asking you personally, hypothetically, if you enjoy incest.
No.
Like, no, I'm not saying if you
Oh,
do.
if I do.
I'm not asking whether you do. I'm hypothetically saying, suppose that you do.
Okay.
Suppose that you do, and that's just your attitude. That's just your, that seems to be a problem, because also,
I'm wondering how.
well, because it seems to you right now that you're convinced that incest is just terrible, but it also
Because
seems
it's indexed
plausible.
to me, right? That's indexed to
Right.
me now,
But it
right?
also seems really plausible that your attitudes and preferences can change over time.
It seems what?
Plausible that your attitude and your preferences can change over time.
No, yeah, actually, I think you're underestimating the or overestimating the plasticity of preferences and values. They don't change on a dime. I think my values,
I think they do.
Okay, do you think
Sorry, go ahead.
do you think people's food preferences radically changes as they get older?
Let's just take the moral preferences. I mean, I think you can.
Even
acquire
moral
taste.
preferences, yeah, they don't change very.
Yeah. I think they
especially
do.
about incest.
Yeah.
You think people's
No,
preferences about
I think
incest?
they absolutely do. Well, I don't know about incest, but I mean, well, yeah, I would include incest in there, obviously, because I think you do things like you in general, not you personally.
Uh-huh.
You do things. If you ever watch like serial killer documentaries or something, they didn't start out by becoming a serial killer. They started out by like testing the limits of what they knew was permissible and what they felt was wrong, and then they tried it and they got the high off of it and so on. And you might do this with incest as well. You might like, try minimal things and try like looking at your sister or something, and then you get
But this does not happen.
radical, more
This
bold.
doesn't
and so
happen
on.
regularly, right? This is
Oh, it happens regularly all the time. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. Well, this is an empirical question, right? So you're saying, let me make sure I understand you before. I don't want to attack something I don't understand. So
Yeah.
you're saying that out of the 7 or 8 billion people here, they have certain sexual preferences. You're saying that it's very common for these sexual preferences just to change in the case of taboo, or in the case of taboo sexual behavior. You're saying that I think the majority of the world has issues, for instance, has a strong preference against having relations with their mother, right? I think it's very hard to change those preferences. There might be sexual preferences about bondage or something like that. I mean, I could
Yeah.
see why that might move a little bit, but even then it doesn't, those are only,
That's
it's not that,
that's the thing. Yeah. So I think they change a lot. They may not change very frequently, and the change happens gradually over time. I mean, if you just like read accounts of people who go into the pornography industry, like they make smaller and smaller, compromises, and they get themselves in a situation. They don't start
and
off
that's
with like
compatible with what I
radical
think.
extreme thing.
I think you and I are agreeing that sexual preferences can change and change for the worse. You and I are agreeing
Yeah,
to that statement,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
But we're disagreeing on how often it happens. Okay. I think, but I'm not so sure.
I,
You're saying,
well, with respect to sexual preferences, it may not happen all that, universally.
but
Um,
it doesn't happen frequently, is what I'm trying to say, especially
but
when it pertains to the taboo ones.
no, I
Like, for
think those
instance,
are
people
rare.
like, what scat
Yeah.
is?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I think people disvalue doing stuff like that right now. That doesn't mean
Yep.
that there's not a handful of people that develop preferences to do it. Okay. But, I don't anticipate a lot of people's preferences changing over the next 15 years to find that
You'd be
interesting.
surprised, man. Like if
Yeah,
you
but
look, we're both adult
we're
men, so we
disagreeing on
know.
degree though, right? It happens, but degree, it just doesn't happen often.
Let me use an example. So over the past 15, 20 years, right? As long as I've been a young man, I have seen in pornography things and radical extremes tested. So now
That's
on the main porn
compatible with what
sites,
I'm saying though.
what the main porn sites are like, but our initial example was incest. All the main porn sites are like incest everywhere. It's everywhere now. So
Okay. Well,
it's
that,
become more acceptable,
well,
but not
I
only
think,
more acceptable socially, but like individually people.
people, it's true. People like to fantasize about taboo things, but actually doing it is
Yeah.
something different. Do you think, like, when you watch Game of Thrones, nobody's actually like, there's a sense in which all the gore, the violence, sexuality is interesting, and we watch it, but
Yeah.
actually doing those things is not that interesting. Okay. So, and I mean, people don't. A lot of people like action movies for the battles, but they don't develop. It's not very common for people to develop preferences to actually go and kill people.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly does happen. Um, but I guess, even if I were to grant it, how is this a problem for the meta-ethical view of subjectivism?
I think because if morality is grounded in your preferences, you can hold it to be at least possible that your preferences now will be something completely later that you completely abhor and you find disgusting.
Yeah, but
And
by the way,
you're going to find T1 time, you're going to find this completely appropriate. And then T2, you're going to find the view at that time completely appropriate. And like, and that, but like, it's just inconsistent. You see what I mean?
okay, so let's just talk about a personal example. So, when I was young, okay, when I was young, and this is completely PG, uh, because we're
Good.
talking about sexual preferences.
Yeah.
So when I was young, I thought lying was wrong, all the time. Like, there's no cases where lying was wrong, and now I think there are cases where, and you should lie. Okay, so I look at my younger self.
Moral should.
Yeah,
Moral should or
well,
pragmatic should.
I don't know what the difference would be. I mean, I don't, whatever. Yeah, morally wrong. The point wrong is what's important here.
Yeah.
So I used to think that it was impermissible, and now I think there are cases where it's permissible.
Okay.
So I look back at my younger self, and I'm like, well, I think I grew. I think I made progress relative to the sorts of attitudes I have today. What's the problem?
I mean, that's a very, like, you're right. It's a PG example. The examples I would use to show the inconsistency would be extreme examples,
But is there
because those are the ones
inconsistency
that
in what I've
provide the
said?
most
But
tension.
is there any inconsistency about that story?
No, it's well consistent on moral realism and subjectivism.
Oh no, I'm okay. But I was giving you my view. I'm a subjectivist, so I
Yeah.
changed my
Yeah.
values. Okay, so can you maybe give me an example. I mean, you could go as PG or not. Give me an
Let
example where
me let
this
me
is a problem.
clarify. Let me clarify. It. I think it's more plausibly consistent on realism than it is on subjectivism. Because yeah, what would you think about your younger self? Would you say um, what he thought was just morally speaking just the wrong thing, right?
Oh, I just wasn't taking into account, improbable scenarios that I find myself.
Yeah. And then your younger self would look to yourself now and think, well, he's mistaken, right?
Yes.
So you even there, even though it's not a radical example, I like to use a radical example, obviously, in thought experiments because it really teases out the tension,
Mhm.
right? But even in this example, you can see that there is some inconsistency there because
How? Okay, what do you mean by?
you thought old person was wrong, and a younger person thinks you were wrong, and yet that's the same you.
Well, it's not okay. It is me, okay, but it's not
In a sense,
absolutely identical, right? Okay,
right? Well,
it's younger me, current me, okay, and current me is talking to you right now, okay, current you,
yeah,
and I'm saying young Danny, um, I don't agree with younger Danny. I think he was wrong. That's
yeah,
indexed to my values today, right now. I mean, and I actually think I could probably could convince the younger Danny, but not on account of any moral argument. Rather, I just give, well, what about these hypotheticals, and then
yeah.
I probably would have changed my mind. But yeah, when you say inconsistency, could you be more clear about what you mean by inconsistency? Because typically, when I'm thinking of inconsistency, I'm saying there's a logical problem for the view.
Mhm.
Or are you saying something different?
Well, it could be a logical problem, but I think it's a moral inconsistency. I
What
think
does that
because
mean?
at an earlier time, let's take an extreme example to really tease out the tension here. At an earlier time, I could be somebody as I am now who rejects incest and finds it abhorrent. You shouldn't do it. Like I think
Hmm.
it's bad. At a later time, I could become a kind of person who finds it totally acceptable and then I fully desire it. The problem with this on subjectivism is morality is grounded in my preferences. So it's both right
That's
for
the
me
very
early.
thesis. You're saying the problem is the very thesis.
No, I was building up the case. So
Oh, I'm
the
sorry. Okay.
problem, right, the view of subjectivism is that it's grounded in my preferences. So my preferences in the beginning are that it's terrible. My preferences later are that it's awesome.
Mhm.
And again, this is just a hypothetical because if I'm sitting here now defending subjectivism, I'm having certain normative ethical views about things like incest. I think it's terrible, but I think the possibility that I could hold just the opposite view provides a real like moral inconsistency here because I'm saying
I don't know
like
what that means.
I can sit right here and say, yes, my view now is totally morally good and right. And my view in 20 years is also, I can say with consistency, good and morally right.
If it's the same?
No, if it's completely different.
No, you could say that, okay, Danny, if in 20 years I develop these values, I would think
Yeah.
I think that would be bad, right? And that would be indexed to your present self. And I don't see.
Does not worry you that this possibility that you could be a different person, like, who you think would be corrupt? Like you think you would, like you. I mean, for all we know, we hope you don't, but you might be in prison in 20 years.
Uh-huh.
Like
What do
and
you
then
what's the worry?
and
Like,
it's just a possibility, right? That you were sitting here now and being like, yeah, that guy, from his perspective, is going to be totally right in his views, and I'm going to be totally right in my views. That seems a real
I'm trying to
problem.
understand why you're worried, because I'm not worried, right? So,
I'm not worried
I mean,
about
look,
it. It's not my view.
I mean, look, and I think there's a kind of tanglement going on. If is it
Sure, yeah,
some
yeah.
kind of problem? Do I wish that it's impossible for me to develop values that, where my present self, current self abhors, right? I mean, would I prefer that possibly be closed? Sure. But again, that preference is indexed to now. Okay.
Right.
So what is,
See,
I'm trying to understand your
when you
worry.
when you compare it to objectivism, you don't have the arbitrariness problem.
No, you can still, the moral facts could just change randomly on an objectivist view, because
Okay,
objectivism doesn't mean
is
universal.
a Christian theist who is a moral relativist, and God grounds morality. And the Christian theists have also said throughout history that God is immutable. He doesn't change. He's the same today, yesterday, and forever. Um, those wouldn't change, right? So when you're comparing the two, like if you're just thinking like, okay, theory versus theory, like one theory seems to have this inconsistency, and I'm not saying it's a contradiction. Like I hesitate, and I'm not even saying it's a logical inconsistency. I'm saying there's some arbitrariness with respect to like at different times I can believe opposite things. You don't have that same situation on objectivism, or at least the objectivism version that I hold to.
I think okay, because there are subjectivist views that are universal, right? So ideal observer theory, or even their versions of divine command theory, where you don't get, it's that subjectivist, but you don't,
Yeah.
you get universalism. And there are objectivist theories, like I think Jonathan Dancy is a moral particularist, right? He denies moral principles, right? It's very contextualized or to the situation, right? So I think really what you have an issue with is particularism or some kind of contextualism, not subjectivism per se. So because on objectivist views, you could still have there. I can invent a meta-ethical theory where the moral facts are held constant or universal based on what Danny wanted on December 25th, 2020. Right? Then I got it. Whatever values
Yeah.
there, right? So that's universal. Those facts won't change because they're only indexed to that psychology at that time.
Yeah.
And that would create a worry for me, because I don't really know what I valued at that time. It'd be terrible if I valued something that I disvalue today, right? So to me, this kind of issue of the issue I think you're pointing out, to me, just occurs on any generalist or particularist view in some kind of form.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not familiar with the generalist particularist distinction.
Okay. Basically, it's very simple. Particularists think you can have moral facts without principles. You can dispense with principles. So there's no universal principles about what you ought to do.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. I don't share that intuition. So I'd probably be a general.
Generalist.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. You see though, the example you use and other examples like it, like we could use subjectivist, like I prefer to put on my left shoe first, and I could universalize that. It's examples like that where you have subjectivism that you could universalize. It seems to me are always going to be like silly examples like that. And it's not going to have, of course, any binding upon anybody, any forcefulness.
Okay. So maybe I can give a non-subjectivist view, like that's not. So suppose the moral facts. Suppose I have a meta-ethical theory where the moral facts invert every week, right? So this week it's X is wrong, Y is wrong, Z is wrong, and then the next week X is not wrong, and then it just alternates, right? And those facts are independent of anybody's attitudes or will or stances or anything like that. That's an objectivist view, but it suffers from the same.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not.
Nobody believes that though. It's contrived. I don't know if anybody like. Yes, here's the thing. Like just like this subjectivist example that could be universalizable. Those are contrived. They're kind of silly examples. And yes, they're views that one could hold in a logical space. But I don't think anybody's really rushing out to grab those views.
Okay, but the point is that it seems like your issues are with the particularists, or the ones that think that the moral facts can just change. Okay, that it's not, the moral facts are not
Mm,
held constant, right? Which is,
yeah.
I think, orthogonal to the realist anti-realist dispute. So
Okay.
there are
Yes.
anti-realist views that you can get universality from. So I don't think your problem is with anti-realism per se. It's with particularism
Yeah.
and
I mean,
something like that. Okay.
and that's the thing. If moral anti-realism just is mind dependence, I'm fine with
Well,
affirming a version of that
more
according to
error
which.
theorist, or more error theorist or anti-realist, but go ahead.
So fine with affirming a version of that that says that all morals are just dependent upon the mind of God. That's fine. I have no problem with that whatsoever. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean, so like I'm not going to die on the heel of moral relativism, or sorry, moral realism or mind independence. If it, I mean, because I'm a theist, you know what I mean.
Uh-huh. So then the
But
next step is
but
that
by
there are,
by realism, I just mean dependent on God. But however you want to construe that, yeah.
okay, so the next step is that you can have so, um, because I know I would, this will lead us to a rabbit hole, I think, but let's just actually not talk about your theology. Let's talk about
Okay.
made up
Yeah.
religions. Okay. Suppose we
Okay.
meet a third person that holds to Christianity, a different religion that not
Sure.
Christianity. And their creator, has a set of values that match the set of values that the Christian God has. Okay.
Mhm.
But the one difference is that they say, well, I don't see a logical barrier for, that's to say, um, there's a possible world in which my creator's values are all inverted.
Mhm.
Okay. So in a way, we got lucky that the values, the moral facts are the way they are in the actual world and not in this other world. So there you get, I think you want to call it arbitrary, right? You get the same problem, you get universality. Now you want to say there's something about the Christian God that makes that possible world impossible, right? That the values that the Christian God has, in the actual world are going to be the same values in every possible world, right? And so
Well, you said it wasn't the Christian God.
right. I'm saying the difference between this made up
Yeah.
Christianity and Christianity is that I'm assuming that, on your view, God's values are not only held fixed across all timestamps in the actual world, but they're held fixed in all possible worlds, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Now, personally, I don't see any argument that would support that, but it, the but I want to get you on board with
Yeah.
the concern that you're raising, would apply to Christianity's universal theory, metaethical theory that is universal. So it's a universal, generalist view. Um, and I want to I want to see if you understand that, and then we can move on to the Christianity claim about God's values being fixed across all possible worlds.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying. So just in a nutshell,
Mhm.
what views are we holding to? The universalizability, but
Okay, so
so yeah.
Christianity says that, hey, my Bosch, right, which is like your God, Bosch,
Mhm.
okay, or Bod, I'm just making up terms, right? Has the exact same values as the
Mhm.
Christian God, okay? Except the only difference is that he could have had different values, and that's just to say there's another possible world where all those values are inverted. So instead of it being, good to help a child, it's good to harm them, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's a kind of a contingency there, such that we're happy that we
Mhm.
found we're in a world where Boss's values are the way they are, and not in this
Yeah.
other set of values. Now,
So
mm,
yeah, so I don't mean to not let you lead me down there, but I think that you would have to change much more about God's nature from the God of Christianity to the God of Christianity. Not just that his morality is changeable, but you'd have to make him, well, he no longer has that divine attribute of impassibility. You know, oh, he may not even have omnibenevolence. He's surely not going to have
wait,
that. That's possible.
I think I'm being misunderstood. It's my fault. It's my fault. So
Go ahead.
it's that Christianity's God is immutable, right? But immutable insofar as that in the actual world, the values never change.
So he's
But
not immutable all possible. He's not necessarily immutable.
well, no, he immutable. Just is that not a? I don't. Are you construing that modally? Because I just understand mutable as that does not change. Is that, or does it mean, or
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I've not ever heard. I think it applies modally, but I've never heard philosophers of religion. I've never read anything about this. I'm sure there are people who've written all about it. Whether it's
Because you can
necessarily
imagine like a
immutable.
possible world where you have a ball and it's immutable, and
Mhm.
that just means that
Yeah, yeah,
any time step that you go, the ball is
right.
gonna be
Yeah,
red. Okay, okay, but that doesn't mean that
I
you're
think that because of God, yeah, this I think yeah, I think it would be necessarily immutable just because you have that rigid designator God, the thing that He is, and when you go to other possible worlds, He's just going to be still same thing. He's still going to be the same character, just like me. You put me in another world, like my counterpart, it's just going to be the same me, just with one thing different. And so if you change one thing different, that's why I was saying like the one thing you want to change between God and this and so he has different worlds, but I'm saying you probably got to change a lot more than just that.
okay. Yeah, that's fine. I want you and I to team up against Christianity for a second, and then we'll go
Okay.
to Christianity. So on Christianity, um, the this God is immutable in the sense that whatever values in the actual world, in this possible world that God has, there's no timestamp where they're different.
Mhm.
Okay. So you have a generalism, right? You have a kind of universal set of values that are indexed to this God. Okay. But, um, the feature that I'm trying to point out here is that there's a sense of luckiness that we got in the
Mhm.
God having those values and not the inverted ones in another possible world.
Thank
Okay.
God.
Okay. So you agree that the concern that you were raising to, I guess, if I subject my sense of my kind of subjectivism, where it's indexed to my values or our values, um, uh, that kind of concern does look like it appears in Christianity, right?
Yeah, yeah. It would be a very different God, but yeah.
Okay, okay. So now moving to Christianity, okay. So I actually look at Christianity like Christianity, right? I think that
Okay.
God has values. So let's say
Mhm.
He values that um, to not have sex outside of marriage, not fornicate. I don't see any logical bar, right, or any impossibility for God to have, even though it's maintained across all
Mhm.
time in slices in the actual world. I see no logical bar where God just has a different value in another possible world concerning fornication.
Yeah, I do because this gets into the classical theistic responses to the Euthyphro dilemma. The idea that, God could just command something to be arbitrary. There's that worry, right? And so classical theism has responses for this. They're going to split the horns of the dilemma. They're going to say that God's commands aren't arbitrary and goodness doesn't exist apart from God. God's character, his nature, his whole character, his whole person just is goodness itself. And so they identify God with the good. And so he couldn't be
Yeah.
otherwise.
Okay, so maybe listening of it, maybe I'll ask this
That's
question.
I think that's what motivated my response earlier. It's like you would have to change a lot more about God, not just morality, but now he's just not the same God at all.
Okay, so just a side question: do you think God
Yeah.
chooses his values?
I think it's a category error to say that he
Okay,
chooses
so
his
he doesn't.
values. I mean, no more than he chooses to be God, because it's just him.
Okay,
He,
so yeah, okay, that's fine.
he's
Okay, just make it clear.
uncaused. Yeah.
So God, I mean, I don't
Yeah.
choose all my values. That's not a problem for me, right? So God doesn't choose his values
Right.
in the same way that I may not choose a lot of my values. Fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, okay, so God disvalues fornication in the actual world, right? Um, do you think that there's a possible world where God values fornication? You'd say that's not possible, right?
I would say that's not possible.
Okay, and I know this is a lot to ask, but can you derive a contradiction or no?
What do you mean?
Well, if it's logic, are you? Let me be clear. When I say impossible, I'm talking about logical impossibility, right? Is there a contradiction in thinking or saying that in another possible world, God disvalues universally, um, uh, sorry, God values fornication, like He actually has set up the world where you are to experiment with sex before marriage.
Mhm. Yeah, because again, the counterpart to God is still going to be the same God. So, and I think that immutability is modal. I think I would commit to that and affirm that. It's just like he's not able to change,
Oh,
but he
so
can
you're
change
sort
the
of
parameters. and then that would provide your contradiction. Like, because of his nature being good, he couldn't command something.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that
Sorry,
God is.
let's wrap this up because I know I have one more guy waiting at least.
How about this? How about
But yeah,
we
go
could
ahead.
talk later then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We'll leave off at this.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and being so kind and really pressing me on these things. I'm learning a lot. I don't know all these
Oh,
things.
I appreciate the
and so
conversation.
I'm working things out.
Can I ask
just
you a
like
quick
anybody
question
else.
though before we
Yeah,
leave?
for sure.
I've been telling people that a good, not like a marginal majority of Thomists are compatibilist. I've looked at a lot of literature, and actually there's not very good surveys, and I realize I'm
Yeah.
getting that anecdotally.
Yeah.
What's your experience?
Well, I think, yeah, I would have to go back in this because when I was learning this in grad school, I thought of compatibilism as way too close to determinism and a compromise view. But since then, excuse me, I was even willing at that time to be radically libertarian and just think, no, it's free will, everything. I have no influence on me. It's just radically free. I can just decide whatever within physical restraints, of course. But I've since evolved on that, and I've not revisited the issue of compatibilism since then. So I'm just, yeah.
Do you
I'm
read
not
Aquinas
sure,
as a compatibilist or an incompatibilist, or do you not take?
I haven't read him on free will. So,
Okay.
although like if his views are close to the Catholic doctrine, or for all we know, they could just have informed Catholic doctrine. Then Catholic doctrine teaches that you are not radically libertarian version of free, that you are like constrained by like your habits.
That's
I
what
know
Catholic
with
doctrine
respect to, like,
teaches?
yeah.
Oh,
So you can change your habits.
compatibilistic-y, right? But
Yeah, you right. Yeah, so it's not going to be radical libertarian. You can, yeah, you can change your habits, but not as quickly as you can change. I mean, so like we can get a capacity talk. I have the capacity to learn Lithuanian, but I don't currently have the capacity to learn Lithuanian. But I can get to that. It's the same idea. Like, you're constrained within not just within physical limits. At that point, you're also constrained by your habits. So I may
okay.
be,
Well,
like,
when
within the
if you
moral
could let me
realm.
know, if you could let me know if you come across when you form an opinion about that, or if you come
Okay,
across a survey, let me know.
Okay.
Do you do you know my
There are
channel?
Thomists. I don't. Yeah. The best thing to do probably is just reach out via
Okay.
email.
It's Annie
Like,
Phil Talk. I was the kid that
yeah,
talked
Phil
to
talk.
Peterson. I don't know.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Well, great to talk to you. Yeah. So I think I've seen you one or two of my comments.
Yeah, I think
so-
that's where you said you might have seen me from. But
yeah. So
yeah.
man, we're been graced by
No,
your presence here.
no.
I really appreciate
It was
that.
nice talking to you. I don't mean to take any more of your time,
Definitely. Yeah.
but do
Yeah.
keep me posted on those two questions because I can't.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
unsettled by it. All right.
Shoot. Okay. Yeah. So I'll find your email then, and there are some groups.
I'll put a
startups
comment
and
on your. I'll put a
societies. Yeah.
comment. I'll put a comment on this video. That way,
Okay.
when you can just. Oh, I'll go back to the video,
Cool.
and then you can just
Sounds
comment.
good.
I'll get it.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome.
Okay, bye.
Good talking to you. See ya.